I want to start with this thread that I plugged to start the show off by Alec Karakatsanis. Give me just a moment here to bring that up on the screen. So he says the New York City subway shooting provides a useful moment to reflect on one of the least discussed aspects of the police debate, the incompetence of U.S. police. After thousands of subway cops focused on caging poor people for fare evasion didn't prevent shooting, New York Police Department let the shooter get away and laughably bungled catching him even after he called them. A random person found him. This mirrors pathetic case closure rates for NYPD generally. For those that don't know, cops are impressively terrible when it comes to actually preventing or solving violent crime, and that is regardless of how many resources or how many cops you throw at the problem. It does not help. The police commissioner then released a Trumpian statement that looks like it was written by a movie writer trying to satirize a hapless autocrat. This kind of state propaganda is apparent to the media when it happens in other countries. Of course, we see plenty of acknowledgement of the way that Russia propagandizes its people, and when we do very similar things, that is treated as business as usual. So, excuse me. So why do thousands of cops across the U.S. spend tens of millions of taxpayer dollars? I hate that taxpayer dollars use right there, Alec. It's not taxpayer dollars, it's public dollars, on information bureaus designed to create social media, influence reports, plant stories, and change narratives. One reason is that police are so bad at what they tell people their job is. Much of the debate about cops rightly focuses on their millions of physical and sexual assaults, thousands of murders, rampant overtime and sick leave fraud, bribery, perjury, high rates of domestic abuse, links to white supremacists, infiltration of left-wing movements, etc. But they are also historically incompetent. Even with greater and greater budgets and technology, unaccountable U.S. police bureaucracies are getting worse and worse at what they say is their core function. Keep in mind, most of the major U.S. police departments made explicit choices not to test hundreds of thousands of rape kits so they could divert resources to drug possession and homeless arrests. Police don't want you to know these things. Of course they don't. In every city I investigate, cops can't produce coherent answers to the simplest questions about their budgets. In Los Angeles, for example, the sheriff has been laughably unable to explain costs of almost $330,000 per deputy, rising 100% in 10 years. This is base incompetence at doing the things most people are told police should do. And because those public safety things aren't actually why police exist and why they are so well funded, it's also true that police bureaucracies are really incompetent protecting safety. Moments like this are really good times to reflect on the fact that police are incompetent at safety because their real purpose is to protect distributions of wealth and power. I've written more about it all here. So NYPD is all over the subway system, you guys, and Eric Adams has actually increased their presence in the subway system. Did that prevent this from happening? No. Could they even catch him before he left? No. It took civilians to catch him. This is a wonderful display of incompetence. And yet, I saw another story here recently that they are now going to be essentially blocking some of the emergency exits from the subway system, not to prevent violent crime, not to keep a shooter from getting away, nothing of the sort, to prevent people from dodging their $2 or $3 fee or whatever it might be. So what happens the next time there's a shooting like this or an attack like this? You've now locked people in to be victimized by a violent perpetrator, all because you can't stand the thought of losing a couple of bucks. What's more important here? Is this really about public safety? Of course it's not. But of course, the police incompetence is a point that is very difficult to overlook. And Alec is always doing a fantastic job of pointing it out there. And I also just want to talk about, this is anecdotal, but the way that the media has covered this story. Like, it's, you guys notice how the more that I read Alec, and I hope the more that I bring you guys his threads, you start to really see very clearly the pro-police propaganda that the press engages in and how they sensationalize crime to justify increasing police budgets and throwing more police resources at the problem. How crime is used by politicians to win over voters by, portraying themselves as tough on crime when often that actually is a horrific policy decision to make. We just, there are so many angles to the way that the press takes advantage of these kinds of things, sensationalizes these kinds of things. etc. I also want to point out that things like this would be drastically impacted, or at least the number of times that things like this happen would be drastically impacted by some basic social services. Like, seriously, guys, if everybody had like actual access to robust mental health care in this country, how many attacks could that prevent? How often do we see a mass shooting and then the perpetrator, it comes out, has been like talking about this kind of stuff for years, or posting about this online, or at least having these thoughts and conversations for years? Frank James is one of them. um, you know, I'm not saying you can prevent every single shooting by providing counseling, but of course it would cut down on the number of them, you guys. The number of mass shootings in this country is absolutely unfucking believable. And a number of things contribute to that, but not the least of which is the lack of public services. Frank James also essentially saying that he thought he was fired for his race and that this was part of a race war, things like that. That's a whole nother element of our society that needs a whole lot of work. So there's a whole litany of angles to all of this. And I just want to drive home for the viewers that the public policy inadequacy is what should be front of mind. Eric Adams' propensity to throw police at absolutely everything while making cuts to social services, that is a significant contributor to this kind of attack. And politicians having done that for decades, right? Like, it's not just Adams. Adams has just pivoted even stronger in that direction. So, and on a kind of similar note here, you guys, pertaining to police, I have another tweet that I want to show you. This is by Ozzy Araujo. 181 NYPD officers lied under oath to, that's essentially the Civilian Complaint Review Board, as you can see there, NYC, New York City, CCRB. Not a single one was fired for it. 181 New York City police officers. So this is just an anecdotal example of what cops are allowed to get away with. And yet, do you ever see the media questioning them as a serious source? Do you ever see the media, while they're citing police departments and cops, do you ever see them turn around and say, hey, by the way, this department has lied all of these times? Do you ever see that? Any context for the viewer at home that this source is less than reliable? Of course not. They play stenographer for these cops. And what do you think the cops are ever going to say about anything? They're always going to say, throw more cops at the problem, right? That's always going to be their solution. Why would it be anything else? So they're all too happy to engage in the senseless and incoherent fear-mongering about crime. They're all too happy to exploit instances that can be sensationalized to their benefit, and the media plays right along. And as Alec often points out, they're never even giving the caveat of, hey, by the way, a lot of experts disagree with this analysis that we're portraying as an expert consensus. So it's just, honest to God, it is astounding to me. I follow this stuff very closely, and it never ceases to amaze me just how strong the Copaganda seems to be, and how prevalent the Copaganda seems to be, how insistent most mainstream outlets are in continuing to push and participate in the Copaganda. So just something to keep in mind as you continue to read the media stories about that subway shooting. They're just going to present it from an angle that is beneficial to the powers that they rely on as sources. That often includes police. We know that the media are not here necessarily in this day and age to serve all of us, or to do ethical or responsible journalism or reporting or commentary. They are here to make money. It's a business, and they know that if they can maintain their sources, it's access journalism, they are likely to make more money. They know that if they appeal to those in power like Eric Adams, they are likely to make more money. They're likely to land interviews and things that will get them views, etc., etc. And it totally creates a perverse incentive for the press, and that is, we see that in the results, right? The brazen Copaganda, the lack of objectivity, the lack of any nuance, the lack of any context. It's really quite outrageous, and I have seen quite a bit of that as it pertains to Frank James and the subway shooting.